Hello, I'm Darren Jackal. I'm in my studio. I talk about product development, design, and mountaineering. Welcome to another episode of Experimental Design, Discourse, and Disclosure. In the past few episodes, I've talked about my three-person winter shelter and the main concerns being user needs associated with shelter, water, and food. I also mentioned that I wanted to design this product with maximum rest and recovery in mind. The next thing I want to talk about is design for convenience, making things very easy and accessible for the user, things that will reduce the user's exertion, their frustration, and any unnecessary movement. I've been in this design development phase where I've been coming up with different potential ideas that I've been testing. I'm now at the stage where I'm kind of combining features from different ideas, recombination side of the product development process. So there are some basic performance characteristics that I've talked about. Weigh as little as possible, so reducing the mass, but increasing strength, reducing part numbers while reducing the volume also that this is going to take up in my pack, but also conversely having a big enough volume for adequate amount of water to be melted or snow to be melted for water, and a big enough firebox to have a big enough fire to actually generate some heat. So all of these things, they can be given an agent that will always be working on their behalf. So if I have a mass agent, it's going to always wanting to be reducing the amount of mass. If I have a strength agent, it's always going to want to be increasing strength. So they're going to be competing against each other. And where I'm at right now is this is quite strong. So now I'm going to try and lose some weight or some mass off it, and I'm going to try to reduce parts while at the same time I want to increase the convenience. What we're going to see here is the essence of form follows function. There's a lot of pressure from many various directions that influence the final form a product will take. Making a product successful depends greatly upon the expectations of the user. A product like the shelter will become desirable and ultimately successful when it performs beyond the user's expectation, regardless of how it looks. This doesn't mean that the designer is not also attempting to make a product aesthetically pleasing from a visual perspective, only that this quality is secondary to performance. Through the many variations I made and tested, I discovered a number of things I hadn't considered before I actually used the contraption. This is a heuristic search where the development's next direction depends upon things discovered through trial and error. This is much like evolution, where an a posteriori, iterative process leads to greater survival of an individual through variation and selection. Looking at the important considerations that went into the test models will lead the development by exposing conditions that negatively affect the product's performance or the user experience. So after I tested and basically melted this version, I moved on to my next version of the structural elbow and the firebox. Now, there's a lot of things going on here that I was trying out. The lid, for one, and the siphon system, which turned out to not be the best idea, but there are things I learned about this, and having a pot lid that stays attached. One of the frustrations I had with melting snow in my Mega Mint was that I was often doing it in the doorway of the tent and melting snow on my stove that was sitting on a shovel, and that would eventually melt the shovel down, and I would often spill the water, or just taking the lid off and finding a place to put it down was an act of frustration. So by having a system where the lid doesn't leave the system, I really cut down on that potential frustration. Now, the problem with this system is that it's really a contraption. You can see there's stainless steel, aluminum, and all kinds of things going on here that is not going to make this easy to be manufactured. Getting a nice sealable surface between the firebox and the pot was not so easy. So what I realized what I could do was to potentially make some parts out of stainless steel that are thin, but because they have been spun form and an angle put onto them, that they become quite stiff and quite strong. So I made these pieces to fit the pot specifically, and the bottom piece here has got a bunch of different things going on that allows me to try some other ideas out for the bottom of the firebox. But these two become the top and the bottom, and then it's skinned with some stainless steel and spot welded together. So that, in terms of manufacturability, this becomes much more doable for mass production. A thing to note about this is when you're doing something like this is the strategy of developing the various components. Now, I've not done a lot of spin forming, and certainly not in stainless steel, so I did not know how this was going to finish up, what my final dimensions were going to be in thickness here or in overall diameter. And I needed to know those things to determine such things as the arc of this component, as well as other things on the firebox, distance down, where this is going to be. So it's best to make these components first and just go with what you get on the measurements to then transfer that into the measurements you're going to need for something like this. This became really useful when I was developing the ash pan for the firebox when it's in wood burning mode. So what I wanted to do was make this piece first before I made these pieces, because this is just a cut in a water jet. Changing these is much easier than trying to change this if I make this first. So again, if you're into fabricating components for your test rigs, think about, you know, what's going to be easier. Is it going to be easier to make this and then try and make this buck and form my metal around it to actually then fit this? Or is it easier to make this thing first and then just cut this accordingly? So you can see this fits in here and becomes a nice tight fit for the firebox. And the next part of this episode will go to where I am at this stage with the latest version, and I'll run down basically the procedure you would go through when you want to set this up. Selection and preparation is over. You have 3 main anchors in, and you've assembled the center pole section with the stack and chimney in place. I don't have the shim stock in here. I don't have enough headroom. Remember that these cables would be running to the 3 main anchors, and they would not be running down here because these are going to get in my way in this demonstration. The other thing to remember is the upper portion of the structure is now sort of defined. These are not adjustable. I have all my adjustment down here. If you ever stayed in a tent that sags and you need to retension it, this becomes incredibly easy to retension the whole thing. The stove is supported off the ground so it doesn't melt into the ground. The important parts of these things is that I've got a nice flat surface to mate with my pot. The details surrounding how these pieces are important is details that I'm not going to get into now. Just know that things like frustration by having the female and the male connectors in this orientation allows me to look through these holes to find my pins to make it easy to go on and off. This needs to be redone for the next version. This is just a contraption that I've discovered is necessary to keep this thing stabilized. For the boiler, I would put in my stove. This part took a while to figure out. It goes up inside and simply spins. You adjust this guy in, and you're now ready to melt snow, boil water. The siphon system didn't work, so I needed to figure out another way to do it. And this is how I'm suggesting it be done now. Finally, if you want to cook in this thing, you take the firebox, line up the seams, pop it up in, rotate it, pull it down slightly, that locks it in place. This is a grate and a lid. I'm going to wrap it up now and we'll take it from there. Okay, that will wrap up this episode. I probably will do one more episode on the from the road shelter. We'll have to deal with the apex where the stack exits the tent. There's a lot of heat cycling going on there. With the high heat of the wood stove, I've really had to expand my understanding of the heat cycling issue. That's it. I'm Darren Jackal. I talk about product development, design, and mountaineering. Thanks again. This has been another episode of Experimental Design, Discourse, and Disclosure. Thanks for dropping by. See you next time.